Hi, I'm Erika of the Knit Kind podcast and Grapefruit and Gardenia Designs. You can find me on Ravelry as KnittyElf40 and on Instagram and Facebook as Grapefruit Gardenia. I want to thank everyone. I haven't recorded in a while. I did record one episode. I wasn't happy with it. I know that my episodes are very impromptu. They are informal. They are meant to be like you're sitting around a knitting table. But even still, this one was just not what I wanted to put out to the world. So it's been a while. This is really going to be more of a catch-up rather than any, not that they're scripted episodes, but it's not going to be a heavy topic episode. I just did want to get back in the swing of putting things out, and so I'm recording with a little catch-up video today. So thank you to everyone back, almost a month and a half more ago now who did support Knit for Food. We had a wonderful group at the Unruly Stitch in Weston, Massachusetts. Junction Fiber Mill started a team this year after I had chatted with them about that, which was so great to see. And we had Team Knit Kind, which was me, my neighbors, friends, some of you. Thank you so much for your support. The overall fundraiser, I believe, raised around $380,000 this year. If you contributed, I sent out a wrap-up. I hope you got that. You even got a little video of me dancing to some Beyonce. I had a whole one put together, and it was so much fun to make. But I was concerned it would, some copyright flags because I guess that, the song and Beyonce's legal team's got that locked down pretty heavily, which, good for her. She should, as an artist, be making sure that she's profiting properly. But we knitters were just doing a little dance to her new Texas Hold'em song that was choreographed for us by, I don't want to give her credentials wrong, but we had a woman working with Knit for Food who works on movement during knitting breaks, ergonomics. So, we were lassoing to stretch our wrists and moving back and forth, and it was really funny. And every move was choreographed to like a knit stitch, a purl stitch, yarn overs. It was a lot of fun and just what we needed for a break in the middle of that day. So again, thank you to everyone who supported that fundraiser, who spread the word about it, who participated themselves. And just a moment, regardless of politics, religion, everything else, World Central Kitchen is one of the beneficiaries of that fundraiser. And I just want to recognize the aid workers who lost their lives recently and just kind of hold space for them for a minute. So, back to knitting as it relates to Knit for Food. I brought my little somewhat almost finished project from it. I wanted to knit something that day that wasn't for me, that wasn't a pattern design, and it was March, and it was March, I think 23rd this year, right? Right around my birthday and March Madness, and so I found this pattern to knit for my son. Now I only have one of two done, and I don't have the stitching on the basketball, but this is called the Nothing But Knit Mitts. So March Madness, it's a basketball hoop. Again, like I said, this needs some stitching, but this is what I knitted during Knit for Food. So is this exactly 12 hours worth of knitting? I mean, no, I had to drive back and forth to our meetup. I had to take stretch breaks. I ate. I wasn't knitting while I ate or while I learned that stretching dance. But, it also gives those of you who aren't knitters, maybe a sense out there for what does 12 hours of knitting look like. Depends on your project, depends on the weight of your yarn. We all know this. Your familiarity, how much you have to frog back, right, or rip out your knitting. But anyway, this is what I did. So I have one of two basketball mitts done for my son for hopefully next winter, if I can squeeze the other one in there. And if not, I suppose you can always wear one regular mitten, right? That's not going to hurt anybody. At least he's got the one done. Smells good. I blocked it. It's Malabrigo Rios. It's what I had in stash, although I think it would be really, really nice with a non-superwash wool. I think it could be really neat. So, it's always like the transition here. You can sort of see is not the greatest with the stranded knitting to the non-stranded knitting, and just the way you have to carry across that many stitches, and probably the fact that I was tired in knitting. But the colors are fantastic, and once it's stitched, it'll look good. So, Nothing But Knit Mitts. It's a free pattern in Ravelry. The designer, I believe, is listed as K. Cox. And if I can, I'll link it in the description. So that's my only finished object I can show you. I could show you, I knitted another version of my vest. So what happened after Knit for Food? Well, I was motivated to go back to my vest pattern. If you've watched some episodes or seen my posts on social media, you know I designed my first garment a year ago, and I wore it to Knit for Food in 2020. What the heck year is it? 2023. I then worked last summer for the 1 week my son went to camp, and I worked on grading that pattern. And in hindsight, as I was learning more about grading and size inclusivity, you know, I used a set of body standards, essentially, sizing standards, that I was not sure were the best possible ones to use now. So with this vest design, there were some issues around the fact that it's in a heavier weight yarn and how increases look in that. So it's not just whether you can grade something, but how it's going to look when you have to do a certain number of increases in a certain weight of yarn and so on. So anyhow, I put that project down last summer, because I just needed a break from it. And I was motivated after Knit for Food to just say, I'm going to do it this year. And I sat down on and off for 3 solid weeks pretty steadily, going through various sizing standards, size models, calculations, grading spreadsheets. I have not taken a course in grading, so this was really a crash course for me. I had library books all over the floor, and I think as I go, I'll probably do a podcast just about that, just about the sizing, some thoughts about size inclusivity and what it means now, what it might mean in the future. And I think the best way is to empower knitters to really make the pieces they want to make with pattern designers who are doing their best to produce inclusive patterns at the time that they make that pattern, as well as present inclusive portfolios. So I have more thoughts on that. I think that is more of a dedicated topic, and I think that perhaps when I get to the point of I want to just flash over and show you the latest version of the vest I did, but I'm not quite ready to for a few reasons. But I really do like a lot of things about it, and I will be ready to share that with the world and hopefully get that into testing this summer. So I thought I would share a little bit about some yarns, one whip. Tea is another design / whip that I have out there, but I can't quite show you yet. And then a little bit of spinning. So I've talked a lot about wool and really the direction that I have gone in of wanting to work with more natural wools. And I've talked a little bit about why, and also just wanting to feature farm yarn and kind of finding my niche as a designer. Now, what I'm wearing right now is all about color, right? It's about color. It's about design and form as well. So that's not going to go away from my life entirely by any means. There are just times I want to pick up some bright colors and work with them. So I'll tell you what this is first. This is my 700 Fence Posts Cowl, the fingering weight version. There are 2 different versions. One is DK, one is fingering. They are different patterns, although there are a lot of similarities, but there are many more sections in the fingering weight one because as you do the shaping, I wanted it to work where I want it to be substantial. So as you can see, this is a very substantial cowl. In fact, the way it is styled, I fold it in on itself. So, I mean, this is what we're talking here. And if you've seen some of the episodes I featured it, you'll already know that. But anyhow, that's what I'm wearing, and that's about color, and it brightens my day. I did this one with rainbow minis, and so I call it Rainbow Through the Clouds because my main color here is black and white. Okay, so that is in contrast to what I'm working on now, which is with natural yarn, and I am working on a collaboration that I believe you'll be able to learn more about in September, maybe later in August. And the test call should be out in July. So if you follow me and you want a little preview, stay tuned, because I am so excited about one of the designs I'm working on. And it's really a tribute to sheep and farm yarn and the way that I like to design with them. And so there'll be a lot more coming on that. But what I have done is, as I've been working on my designs, I promised you that even when I didn't design in farm yarn, part of my commitment was to take a pattern that I am designing and see what it will be like in farm yarn. And so I did that with the 700 Fence Posts Cowl DK weight. That was designed in an organic merino, or you could use a superwash. But that was really designed with more intentionality of being drapey and colorful. And then I knitted it up in the farm fresh yarn from Junction Fiber Mill. And so as I've done that with some of the things I've been designing, I went to one of our local yarn stores on a little day trip with my son out in Northborough, Massachusetts, and it's called Craftworks, and they sell Brooklyn tweed shelter. So I picked up a few skeins of that to play with. I was looking at some designs, some colorwork designs, and I just thought it would be good to kind of play with some black, white, and gray from there. And I also am working with Arbor Lodge, which is their bulky or chunky weight yarn. And what I want to show you, because we've talked so much about wool and sustainability and sourcing ethically and the textile production or, mills in the United States and how much has changed. I've talked about Clara Parks and Vanishing Wool, right? And so I just want to show you how Brooklyn tweed, if you haven't used it, how they label their yarn and the significance of it. So this is Shelter. This is a worsted weight yarn. It is a woolen spun yarn. But here's what I want to tell you about it. You're buying this yarn, and on the label, it tells you. It tells you this is American Targhee Columbia wool, worsted weight, 140 yards, the gauge range, the needles, the things you'd expect. But here's what's amazing, and what, if you have the financial means to be able to do, I just want to empower you to think about where your yarn is coming from and all the pieces that go into it. So let's see, is that focusing? I can't really tell with my glasses, but I'm going to read it to you. This is the inside of the label, which is interesting. I wonder if it was on the outside of the label, if more people would tune into it. It says, committed to U.S. textile production. Origin, Wyoming. Scoured in San Antonio, Texas. Spun in Harrisville, New Hampshire. Dyed in Cartersville, Georgia. And Rutherfordton, North Carolina. And designed in Portland, Oregon. And it says American Wool at the bottom. It says, we love wool. Meet Shelter, our versatile 2-ply worsted weight yarn. Gently woolen spun for lightness and warmth, Targhee Columbia wool gives softness and structure to sweaters, blankets, and accessories. Shelter's gently pebbled texture blooms into a plush fabric upon blocking, alternates skeins for best results, etc., and the care. Now, I have used Shelter for a sweater before, and it's interesting because it definitely is one of those yarns, for me at least, when I was making the sweater, and this was a while ago, so I don't know if it would still be the same for me as I've evolved as a knitter, but it was a little bit of like a gauge mystery, and part of that, as I have now become more familiar with wool and spinning and how fabrics are created from yarn, has to do with how it's spun, how it blooms, and so anyway, this is Shelter. I wanted to give you a little insight to that. Similarly, with the Arbor Lodge, when you open up, I don't know how I get this one off without ripping it. The origin, Montana and South Dakota, scoured in Jamestown, South Carolina, spun in Springvale, Maine, dyed in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and designed in Portland, Oregon. And so as we've talked about, one of the things that's interesting is you might say, well, why is this one spun in Harrisville and this one is spun in Springvale, Maine, right? Why aren't they sending all their things to the same mill to be spun? Well, there are woolen spun mills and there are worsted spun mills. And not all of the mills can do the same thing. And then depending on the size of the mill, there's a real backlog for production too, right? So this is more of a commercial venture, even though it's you've got breed specific yarn here, you've got ethically sourced, you have every step of the American production of it outlined. But, like I've talked about Junction Fiber Mill, they popped up so people with small flocks could still have yarn made from their wool, because there's just supply and demand and mills that have closed. And how do you get things done? And there's a year-long queue to get your wool turned into yarn and so on. So I'm having this conversation today. You might say, why are you bringing this up today? I mean, I'm going to continue to talk about wool, number one. Number two, this collaboration I have coming up is about farm yarn, right? And is about this idea of how long it takes to go from sheep, have the shearing process, all these steps, right? The scouring, the spinning, the dyeing, everything that happens, and how you do that, whether you're a small farmer or you're what some people feel like is a major company, but in our world, major company, right? It's all relative. So I just wanted to give a little shout out. This is not a brand that you're going to find in every yarn store. And you might be looking at it online and think, why, right? Why do I pay this premium? Or I can't feel it. I can't touch it. Should I take a chance on it? The other thing I want to tell you is the yarns are all very different. So pay attention as you're looking. If you're not a hand spinner, or you're not as familiar with preparation of fibers in terms of something ultimately becoming a worsted spun yarn or woolen spun yarn, and what a good use is for it. If you are knitting a pattern and the designer has used that yarn, that's one little bit of endorsement, right? That's going to work for that pattern. More than a little endorsement. It's the recommendation, right? But you still want to understand what you're getting, because knitting a woolen spun and a worsted spun sweater, it's different. And you might love the pattern, but you wouldn't have loved the fabric that was created. And you can switch it, but you have to understand also when you're switching it, the implications that has. So I just wanted, again, to kind of shine a light on a company that is very supportive of the knitting industry, the fiber industry, American wool, independent designers, and there'll be more to come on that. But I thought, since it was something that I was working with, I would take the time to show you the inside of these labels and just maybe a little bit of education to share on the podcast. So the other thing that I was going to say, it is a whip. It's something that when I recorded a couple weeks ago and was trying to post was very active at the time, and now I haven't picked it up since because I've been knitting on these designs. But this is a spin that I did kind of recently. We're always holding things up and saying whether they focus or not, right? But you can pretty much see, I think. And I am really enjoying feeling this wool right now. It's funny because I did a little bit of a, oh gosh, I'm going to lose the term again. It's not, I want to say combination spin, which is not what I mean. When it's, semi. So, people will debate it, and I have told you I'm not a spinning expert. I enjoy being a novice and working kind of intuitively. So worsted spun and woolen spun, right? Woolen spun is when the fibers are not all going in the same direction. There's a lot of air, and you have a yarn produced that is woolen spun. Worsted spun is when the fibers are all going in the same direction, and as you're drafting, it's a smoother draft. And I believe if you're doing a short forward draft with all those other conditions that you're talking, worsted spun, smooth. And if you're doing like a long draw, I think that's also part of when you're doing a woolen spun, in addition to those other pieces, the fibers not necessarily all going in the same direction and more air. And then I don't know if it's for most of us, but certainly for me with this was like the semi-worsted spun or the semi-woolen spun. We're not mills, right? I mean, we're doing the hand spinning process. So what I tried to do with this, part of it, oh gosh, I don't have them looking around. So I have a big bag of fiber. So this fiber, which I think I brought the label up. Yeah, so I brought the label up, just not all the loose fiber. So I bought this in Maine last year. And I'll show you the label. So for 2 ounces, it was $10. You can see that from Underhill Fibers, Spinning and Carding Mill in Gorham, Maine. And this is labeled Sweetie. It is Cormo, Finn, and Blue-Faced Leicester. So I don't know where it says Cormo by Finn by Blue-Faced Leicester. I don't know if that's one sheep or, one where those breeds have been crossed, or if it is wool from Cormo and Finn and Blue-Faced Leicester that's all been carded together. I am clearly not a shepherd or a breeder, so I couldn't tell you if people do cross those breeds. But if anybody knows and wants to share, go for it. I'd love to hear from you or anybody who knows Underhill Fibers. I bought it when I was, I don't know. I still feel newish to knitting. I mean, I am not anymore, I guess. But I think we're all equally feel like we have expertise and simultaneously like something is still new to us. And spinning, I got my Ashford e-spinner just in November. And before that, I was spinning on an eel wheel and a drop spindle. So anyway, when I bought it, I probably didn't even think to ask if it was what that answer was, whether it was 3 different wools carded together or not. But I did take this big bag of fiber and, I split it into sections and I weighed it. But I didn't prepare it any more than that because I really did want a little bit more of that semi-worsted spin where I didn't want everything just combed totally together. So you can kind of see here that some of the hairs are coming out. It gives it a little bit of a halo. It's really soft. It's really light. My stomach's growling. I did eat lunch, but I ate it a while ago. So anyway, that's my spin. Continuing to connect to yarn. I actually got a new spinner's book the other day, so next time I do a talk more about spinning, I'll show you that. While we're on the spinning note, I'll show you the other spins that I had finished now a while ago. One of these is a 3-ply and one is a 2-ply. So this is a 3-ply. And this is a 2-ply. It's from the same braid, as you can probably tell. It feels nice. I love all of the yarns, right? And it's so funny that when you've been working with what feels like a really soft farm yarn sometimes, and then you put something else in your hand, you're like, oh, right, there is a difference. So one of the things I learned about myself spinning these is that I am becoming more sophisticated, I think, with my tactile sense, because when I was first buying fiber and spinning, right, just like when I was first buying yarn, I bought a lot for the color, and then I bought a lot of undyed so that I could experience different breeds. And when I was buying the ones with color, I probably didn't pay tons of attention, so I started spinning this, and it was really, really easy to spin. And there was the part of me that was thinking, is it because I've been spinning more? Or is it because there's something about the fiber that's really easy to spin? And as I was having this thought and drafting, I said, wait, something in here feels like it's synthetic. And I really didn't pay much attention to the label. I knew it said merino. And I'm sure when I bought it, I paid attention. But when I just decided to spin it one day, which is a little bit of my meditative rest sometimes now, or kind of like being in the shower when you think, you can spin and think at the same time. I just pulled it out for the color. I separated it like I was going to do a fractal spin. And I also knew I wanted to do a 3-ply because I had just gotten my new 3-bobbin Lazy Kate. So I was spinning it and I said, it feels synthetic. And then I kind of looked down at my hands and I said, yeah, the reason it's so easy to spin is the staple length. And if it was just merino, the staple length, I would have had to draft it more thoughtfully, I guess is probably the best word. This was something that wasn't I didn't have to pay a whole lot of attention to staple length. And I looked at the bag, and indeed it was a merino nylon blend. So it was the nylon that was in there that I think is probably what made it so easy to draft, because, you know, that kind of goes on, right? So it's holding together your staple lengths as you're drafting. And this still feels super, super soft. And as we know, it's a little sturdier with some nylon in there. But I could feel it when I was drafting it. So little story about that. I don't even really remember spinning this one at this point. This was from Rolags, but it doesn't say what breed, but it was from the same company, the Friends and Fiber. So it was a really dark purple, and there are, in some spots, there are these like flecks of gold that are kind of neat. It's not sparkle. Well, actually, there you can see it right there. And so that was one that I had fun with. Now that I'm feeling them, I can't wait to try knitting with some of them. This is going to crinkle. It's going to crinkle for a second because I want to put it back in there. So those, and then my more natural spin is this one. And this is Gotland. And what I did with this one is and actually, right, we all do these have been in a bag, but see how you get the flap test for how long hair when you're talking about long wool or medium, short. Anyhow, this is Gotland, and I had Gotland from a farm in Marshfield, Massachusetts. Drawing up Little's Creek Farm, and it was from the farm fiber days, and it was a little bit harder to draft. I didn't do any extra prep to it, and it was a little bit kind of packed in. So what's interesting is I had played around with that a little, and then I got when we were in Vermont in the fall, I got some Gotland at a local yarn shop there, and it was like so silky and slippery and smooth, and it was gray. I want to say, I don't know if it was labeled that it was from Sweden or not, but it was like a commercially produced one. It was really inexpensive. I'd like to learn a little bit more about the company that made it. I didn't find a whole lot at first. But why I'm telling you is I sort of took the best of both worlds, or the worst of both worlds, and made something that was easier for me to draft as the recreational spinner that I am. So I took the Little's Creek local Gotland that was like a creamy color with some gray mixed in, and I took this super silky, slippery Gotland, and I took them and I put them on my blending board, and I brushed them, and I made Rolags. And from those Rolags, I got this. And so I just think that's really neat. Like, now I have a yarn that's from those two. It's still the same breed, but it's two different sources, and it's just a completely different yarn than I would have gotten from either of them alone. So it was really fun. Kind of a good reason to have, I guess, a stash of fiber if you're somebody who wants to play around with it like I do, and you're not specifically trying to spin a sweater's quantity or something. So those are my spinning projects. And then I have one knitting whip that I can show you. So this is my Artus Shawl. I nearly forgot that I had this because I had been working on it quite a bit before I went back to working on my vest design and these other designs that I'm doing now. And I made it pretty far before I put it down. So let me show you. Here's where I've made it to. I'm going to unfold that a little bit. So this is the Artus Shawl by Natasha Hornby. Moonstruck knits. It's clearly not moonshine knits. That's what wanted to come out of my mouth for some reason. Maybe because it's Friday and it's almost, well, no, it's not almost 5 o'clock because it's almost 2 o'clock. So I made it through the waffle section here, the stranded knitting, and then into the mosaic color work. And I am working here in Sonder yarn DK. It's a Massam blend. It is, it's on the rustic side for sure. I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. It is BFL and Masham. Masham. I have to admit, I don't know how to pronounce that one necessarily, but 75% BFL. Anyway, it's a really, I've enjoyed working with it a lot. I've heard a lot about it. It's the first time I had used it. I started late, but it was a knit along at my local yarn shop, and I knew I wanted to try this pattern, so it was a great reason for me to support them, get the yarn there, get it casted on, and I just knew I wasn't going to finish at the same time. But now I can pick this up when I'm in between other things and bring it with me this summer. And I don't have tons more to do. I mean, the rows get long, so it's not a quick project by a long shot, but I think if I have it for fall, I'm going to be really happy. I have a blue that I'm going to work in here, and that might be it. I think it's 5 colors, so that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. Yeah. So I guess the blue is the other one that will be worked in, and then it will kind of repeat backwards. This is full English. I believe it's called online. I can't remember if it's online or offline for the gray. Maybe offline. Espresso yourself, I think, and then like toast and honey. And I think the blue that I'm using is called denim. But you'll see it in my Ravelry projects if you look and you're curious. So I would highly recommend it. Her designs are beautiful, and also her aesthetic is very similar to mine in some ways. I don't want to compare myself in the way. I mean, she's a wonderful and very established designer. But we all have our patterns and our colors that we gravitate toward, and aesthetics that can be similar and yet different at the same time. So I think if I ever get asked the question, some of the designers that I have been drawn to, and not always, but Natasha Hornby, her things are beautiful. I really love Caitlin Hunter's designs. Not every single one is exactly something I want to cast on and wear right away, but many of them are. I do really like her aesthetic. I think it's playful and thoughtful at the same time. It's traditional and modern at the same time. It's a lot of the things that I look for and I value in a design. There are many, right? I mean, Jen Steingass has beautiful yoke sweaters. And when I was first knitting especially, I really loved the Casa Pinka designs. I have my, not ponchos, there's a couple of Magical Thinking shawl and then All Point South. I love wearing both of those. So see, there's kind of similarities, right? There's the way people play with color. There's the way, color work I do just enjoy. And just the designs that they put out. Those are a couple of the people that come to mind immediately, though I'm sure there's more. I know that there are, and maybe sometime I'll come up with, kind of my top 10 designs that keep popping in my feed that I really like. Although I also really like finding designers that you might not know of, right? Like we all see a lot of the big designers over and over again. It doesn't mean that they're making, this amazing living and everybody else is not, but it's kind of nice to also find designers that you might not know about who are very talented, and whose aesthetic you might love. So that does maybe lead me to kind of a final thought. I don't think I have to go too much. This is a long enough episode to catch up. But where I really feel like I've kind of found myself as a designer, not in every single piece, but I was thinking about it, and I really feel like I'm embracing that description of like a fiber artist designer, because when the designs that I get the most excited about and that kind of like almost create themselves, it sounds weird. Obviously I'm doing it, but there's a process that unfolds, and it's different from sitting there and saying, I'm going to design a sweater and it's going to be this construction, and okay, here I'll kind of put in a design element, right? The ones to me that have meaning and a connection to the inspiration for them, and I don't have to worry about whether or not I'm the best knitter in the world. And that's what I've really thought about a lot lately. I mean, there's so many very talented knitters, technically proficient, and you could have the biggest designer sitting next to the person nobody's ever heard of, and maybe that person's knitting is 10,000 times better, but this person who's a designer has this creative mind. And we don't all need to be in any kind of competition about how many techniques or how perfect your tension is, because I think knitting, again, it's about bringing joy to yourself, to others, to creating beautiful things. We all sometimes let perfection get in the way of good enough. And so I've really just found, most of the time when I'm not being too critical of myself, kind of my happy place with this designing, and where I am really enjoying the process the most and feel like I have the most to offer. So stay tuned. I hope that you will, first of all, I hope you're knitting something great. And if you are and you're really enjoying it, drop a note in the comments. I'd love to hear what you're knitting. And then I hope that you will continue to tune in and follow me on my knitting journey and my design journey, which I really love sharing with you. And I also know that it seems to be what people are interested a lot of times in watching whenever I post a video about a new design that I've worked on. So there'll be more of those to come. I hope in the meantime that you knit kindly, live kindly,